like I said before, there's a lot of kind of demo hypeware type companies that make a lot of big claims. And I think the same rules apply to AI and agentic solutions as have applied to like every feature set, which is, don't talk about your product, talk about what your customers are doing with your product and be really outcome focused.
Welcome back to the podcast. Today, I'm joined by Matt DeLauro, president of Go-to-Market. SEON helps companies prevent fraud and financial crime across markets like fintech, payments, digital banking, gaming, retail, and trust and safety. At RevGenAI, we focus on how B2B leaders are generating revenue in 2026 through AI, building thought leadership and authority, and how they're generating a pipeline from their go-to-market systems. What I'm excited to touch on today is not just what SEON sells, which is fraud prevention, but how they're actually building trust in a crowded, high-stakes market and where buyers may not act until there's a real urgency, and how their strategy has compensated for that. Matt, it's great to have you.
Yeah, great to be here, Meir. Thanks for the invite.
So can you just start off by giving us a quick version of what SEON does and what usually makes a buyer realize that they have an urgent problem and what you guys help with?
Sure. Yeah, we produce a system of record, what we call a command center, that's sort of AI driven for prevention and detection of fraud and financial crimes that people commit on the internet, right? And that means that we have APIs and sort of workflows and tie-ins where people's core product, our customer, whether they're a digital bank or an online sports book or a leading retailer, at certain points in time, they want to get information about who's interacting with their digital property, and they can use our tools to enrich their view of who that customer is and how they're interacting with them. And that gives us the ability to do some decisioning and help them understand if they're working with a legitimate counterparty or customer. And we've been delivering this solution since we were founded in 2017, and it's been a lot of changes along the way, both in the market and with our product and who our customers are. But it's been a really exciting ride.
Yeah. I'm really curious because there's that moment when a company, gets caught off guard and they've noticed that they've had, fraud occur, which is obviously a huge signal that you guys can work with and use that urgency throughout your sales motion. But what kind of approach or hook do you see works best when it comes to building a relationship with the right types of companies and decision makers before that event occurs?
Yeah, a fraud attack or some sort of regulatory action that nails a company for failing to be compliant in a certain way, or those are certainly the most compelling reasons for somebody to go out into the marketplace as one of our buyers and look for a solution. But if that buyer doesn't know who you are when that happens, and you can't predict when that's going to happen, then they have a limited amount of attention span. They can't go talk to, even though we're in a very noisy space, 10 or 15 companies, right? So you have to make sure that you're sort of top of mind in expressing an alignment between the problems you solve and the ones that company, depending on their industry or geography, might have far in advance of those interesting moments. But it's a double-edged sword because you can't really generate demand usually until there is some type of problem. And not every problem is the result of a fraud attack. It could be a company raises a lot of money and they're an early stage fintech and nobody knows who they are, so nobody's trying to rip them off. And then all of a sudden there's a bunch of PR and people kind of realize who you are and you become a target. Global expansion is another sort of key indicator. We see a lot of, particularly fintechs and digital service providers, that they move into new markets and they're exposed to different types of fraud, or at least their current stack that they're using to be compliant or prevent fraud, doesn't extend to additional products, additional use cases, additional geographies. And oftentimes that becomes a point of attack. And so we spend a lot of time trying to figure out, in a very specific way, who are the best companies for us to do business with? Who are the buyers that are there? What are the types of, events that they interact with from an industry, or a skill set perspective? What are the types of media that they consume? Where can they be physically found at different points in time during the year so that you can interact with them? When they are researching things that are related to their domain, what types of thought leadership are they looking for? Is it at a different level of abstraction, very specific technical topics or more strategic? And then, being able to sort of introduce yourself to the buyer through a lot of those different mechanisms doesn't generate demand, but it does help you catch it when it comes.
Yeah, I like that last point that you just said. Most companies I see excel in catching demand when it comes because there's always a part of the market that is ready to buy. But what's really interesting to me is how you've positioned the go-to-market strategy across a lot of different industries, and how you're targeting those different industries when each one of those may have different pain points and different requirements. So how has that process evolved throughout your growth, and what do you see is kind of the most important when it comes to figuring out who you can help most?
I think there's always going to be a certain number of buyers you're going to catch them with this sort of SEO, GEO because of their personality type. They're constantly out there looking for the coolest, newest, shiniest thing, right? And we think those people are going to find us too. And being really transparent about how your technology works. It's a really unique thing for us. There isn't another company in our space that has Stripe level transparency where sort of all their, API docs and repos are out there. But that's like 2 standard deviations away from the mean of the population are those people that are like constantly looking for the coolest, shiniest toy. Most people are in a practical majority of buyers where, they educate themselves on a regular basis, but, what they're looking for is focused vendors that solve precisely the problems that they have, like a really strong alignment. And generally that the biggest kind of component of that alignment of correlation is the industry that they're in. So it's, they ask questions like, who do you work with that looks like me, that does business the way I do business, right? And so, if you're positioning with respect to their education and sort of learning development isn't that you're a focused vendor solving problems for customers in their industry that offer the products that they do, then, you have a chance of creating a lot of objections because, you can get a misperception of who you are. And oftentimes that comes from trying to sell everything to everyone everywhere or trying to sell the features of your product rather than expressing the business problems that you solve for end users and really telling customer stories. We're in a super noisy market and there's a lot of companies that are very kind of demoware, slideware heavy, and they're constantly talking about their latest feature for this and that. But like most buyers don't want to have to do the mental work of connecting how that produces a solution for them, right? They don't care about features. Like, hey, that's cool. I'm glad your engineering team's proud of that. But like, how does that stop more fraud? Like, how does that reduce manual review time for me? How does that help me control OpEx internally?
Yeah, you highlighted something so clear that everybody feels in 2026, and it's been going on for the last couple of years, but just the buyer fatigue. Everyone is getting bombarded with pitches. And so when we were speaking earlier, you mentioned that your outbound is really not a traditional push a demo conversation, and that you focus on getting people into non-sales environments where you can, first generate a real relationship, a connection, and kind of build that thought leadership, which is really interesting because that's the exact same approach that we have as well. But I'm really curious, what environments do you see perform best across, you mentioned like dinners, global events, community, webinars, or just like more technical content and possibly, checking off that interest from buyers who are highly technical and searching. But what have you seen has worked best across your strategies?
Yeah, but there's a lot of reticence to hop on a phone call and talk to a sales rep and see a demo. Like people that's a very kind of like boomerish mentality of, somebody's going to call me up and I'm like, sure, I'll watch a demo, like sign me up. So you think about like the ways that you can engage with that person and sort of help add value and be consultative. It's everything from, getting them to interact with your content. If the call to action isn't talk to a sales rep, it's, have you read our annual sort of what fraud looks like for companies that look like you? It is driving them to virtually attend webinars, right? No pressure environments where they're not going to get a pitch. So, getting to attend webinars where they're going to listen to other companies that sound like them talk about who they've partnered with to solve their problems, I think is a really important one. And then there are also very large industry gatherings and professional groups that throw the, 15,000 person attendee events. And I think you have to surround those events with some things that you do that are bespoke as well, right? You have to do the sort of the lunch and learns, the breakfasts, the dinners, where you can create opportunities for your prospective customers to learn from your current customers. And so we spend a significant amount of our sort of traditional BDR, SDR time trying to get people to interact with our content, trying to get people to meet us in person, trying to get people to attend virtual events rather than the hop on a call with sales and watch a demo.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's, again, building trust is the most important thing, especially nowadays that people are more and more skeptical. And so I really like the approach. Take me back to the start of SEON when you guys didn't have this amazing credibility and all these client case studies that you have now. What really worked to be able to get out of that startup phase and be able to prove your value in front of the types of clients that you're serving now?
Yeah, I think the initial angle is, appealing to that sort of slim minority of buyers that we talked about, which is if you truly believe you have an amazing piece of technology and you're incredibly transparent about it, and you do the right things from sort of an SEO and a PPC and a GEO perspective, people that don't buy like solutions from focused vendors, but that buy like bespoke projects from experts will find you. Right. And, you have to do everything in your power to convert that sort of initial demand of somebody wanting to work with the cool new toy into something that is repeatable. Right. And you have to really be on the lookout for those patterns. We, in the initial early days of SEON, we had a lot of, engineers that were working on fraud problems on behalf of fraud teams and compliance teams that were finding our product. Right. Because they're out there, they're looking at repos and they're able to like look at our API docs and even, pull down a free version of the product and play with it with Postman. And they thought, well, this is really easy. I can't wait to take this to my business owner and show them that I have a solution. Almost the same way as like a Twilio or something like that gets their start, right? You have something that's really cool. You want to apply to the most tech forward people that are out there looking for cool stuff, the people who would wait online for hours for the new iPhone, that kind of thing. And, but then I think the trick is like observing the patterns in that and creating surplus value out of those like custom projects that people do with your software, and then figuring out how to, turn that into a repeatable playbook of a business problem that you solve consistently for other companies. And it's identifying like how big is that TAM, how big is that problem, who else is working on that problem, how competitive can we be there? But it's a lot of listening to your customers.
I think that's a really sound approach. Yeah, I really like the focus on just understanding again what the core problem is that you're solving and how you can make that more scalable. But there's no replacing the unscalable at the beginning when you're just establishing your service or your product's market fit. And I like that approach. It's a good framework to be able to get out of the cycle of just doing bespoke projects and not growing beyond that. I'm really curious about what challenges or friction there still may exist for SEON today, even being as large as you are today, to grow into new accounts and really educate buyers before they're actively looking, and what the real challenges are for you guys in that regard.
I think a lot of it is just headspace. The companies that we work with are typically very, very high growth, very demanding. We think we work hard in SaaS and some of our customers are, fintechs and the most ambitious digital brands in the world. And, they work their ass off too, and they don't have a lot of headspace to sort of think about, fraud and compliance and risk and those kinds of things on a regular basis. So the biggest challenge always is attention span, finding the right people, getting the right message across, creating opportunities to interact with them in a non kind of demo disco capacity. That's always a challenge, and especially for people that work back office, people that are in finance teams and operations functions and compliance teams. They just by nature, their work is like somewhat introverted. Like they're the kind of unsung heroes of the company, and so they're not out there doing a lot of things in the digital space, typically advocating for things or generating their own thought leadership content. So the traditional methods of the way somebody would attract a CRO buyer to a solution is going to be very different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I'm curious because obviously this is the topic that everybody talks about every day is AI. Is where you guys are finding AI particularly useful in fraud prevention, and where is it becoming a risk because buyers need that full transparency or auditability, and possibly even want to see the human validation aspect.
Yeah, I mean, we're very fortunate that, this kind of the wave of sort of AI solutions is sort of like swallowing the world, because in fraud detection, we've been doing probabilistic determination like since our founding. Like, so, we were a machine learning based company at our inception, which was, let's take a look at some sort of inputs and some inferences, and we're going to make a probabilistic determination. Is this a financial criminal or not? So the core foundation of our product has always been machine learning algorithms. And the training of those algorithms to add precision and recall to the output. So from our perspective, it's been a really good thing. I think when it comes to the explainability, I think we're fortunate. There's a lot of companies that have done probabilistic determination, or they produce outcomes and it's a black box and the explainability isn't there. And we always have to bear in mind that at the end of the day, many of our customers are forced to defend the decisions they make to regulatory authorities. And so that kind of audit trail and audit logging is super important to them. And absolutely, we do benefit from sort of not needing as much runtime governance around agentic solutions, because in many cases we are forced for there to be a human in the loop, right? And our customers want there to be a human in the loop. It's really just about making them sort of 10x better and more efficient at what they do, rather than sort of handing the keys to an agentic solution.
Yeah, I mean that was one of the most interesting things that you shared, is how transparent you guys are, and leaving everything out there in the open, and kind of being that forward in your approach to establish your credibility. I know that definitely helps. And I'm specifically interested on how AI becoming so dominant in the conversation today. Is that helping you guys stand out, or is that also kind of creating more noise and then making it harder for you to be unique in your industry?
Yeah, we're in a market where there's a lot of noise. Like I said before, there's a lot of kind of demo hypeware type companies that make a lot of big claims. And I think the same rules apply to AI and agentic solutions as have applied to like every feature set, which is, don't talk about your product, talk about what your customers are doing with your product, and be really outcome focused. And so, the velocity with which we're adding AI features, we could get like consume every digital channel like a couple days a week with like, hey, look at this cool new thing we built. But it's not really about that. You can't make it about yourself. You have to make it about your customers and the outcomes that they produce if you want to see real velocity, because otherwise it's kind of masturbatory, right? You're just, telling the whole world about like what a great engineering solution you had without really getting into the depth of the business problem and how that fits the market. And so we try to be very common sense. Like we are fully red pilled on like providing the best AI solutions. But the way we talk about it to the market is like, let's differentiate ourselves by not being full of shit, and to be common sense, and to talk about how customers are using it. And you do tend to see, and I understand the anxiety. A lot of companies are out there and it's like, there's a new, better model that's better at this or that, like every day. And it's like, as soon as we build something, we need to push it. And it's like, well, all that's producing is noise. That make you feel better existentially that you were sort of first or second or third to get something out. But at the end of the day, like that's why many of these AI projects people are spending a lot of money on them, but they're not winding up in production. And we want to be the company that's putting AI solutions in production for our customers, not the one that has the most buzz on the internet.
Yeah, I think again, at the end of the day, being credible, having that really proven track record is more important than any short-term hype that you could post or generate, because that's what actually lasts, and that what stacks year over year. To wrap things up here, Matt, what advice would you give somebody looking back at the very start of your journey? If you were speaking to somebody who's just starting out, building their startup, and contending with the way the market is in 2026, what should they focus on when it comes to growing revenue and becoming a real player in their market?
Yeah, be absolutely obsessed with your customers being over the moon and ecstatic in love with you. Like, it's not about how fast you add customers. It's not about how fast they go live. It's about how satisfied they are, 3 days, 3 weeks, 3 months, and 3 years later. That's the flywheel that people miss, is to really just focus on making sure that the people that agree to exchange like their problems and their money for your software are like become ridiculously happy with the outcomes that they get.
Mm. Yeah. And I think throughout the whole entire conversation, just the focus on really the outcomes that you're providing and communicating that more clearly and without the hype. I think that's really what stood out to me, is what's working for you guys, and leaning on that more heavily than the AI hype or trying to jump on the next trend. So yeah, I think that's a really sound framework. Thank you, Matt, for sharing everything you did today. For anybody who wants to reach out, either to you personally or to SEON, where's the best place for them to find you?
Yeah, definitely head to SEON.io. If you're a developer or if you're dealing with fraud challenges, like there's a ton of good resources there for you, but feel free to hit me up directly on sort of LinkedIn or at matt.DeLauro@SEON.io. We'd love to hear from you.